I did my undergrads in Shivamogga. It's a town in Karnataka, and I did my masters in the same place from the Kuvempu University. And I recently finished my PhD from the University of Leeds, United Kingdom. My PhD was on the impact of climate change, particularly heat stress, on the functioning of tropical forests. I did my master's in applied botany from Kumbh University, and that was quite a standard course there. And I think I was really fortunate to have gotten this opportunity to work with Professor N.H. Ravindranath at the Indian Institute of Science, and there I imbibed the concept of climate change and understood several aspects of it, working with him and his colleagues. And he was mainly focused on understanding the impact of climate change and mitigation of the effect of climate change, particularly forests. But I think the real turning point was actually when I took up a job from an NGO consortium to measure greenhouse gas emissions from cropland, where by practicing sustainable agriculture, the farmers could reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So I was given this responsibility of measuring how much reduction there could be. And then I did my PhD from the University of Leeds, and that was on the impact of warming, particularly. Of course, climate change remains the same overarching theme, but I focused on heat impacts on tropical tree functioning in the Amazon rainforest, particularly the process of photosynthesis. This is a bit of an interesting story because I was working on agriculture and greenhouse gas reduction from croplands, but I wanted to study forests and trees particularly. I actually wanted to do a PhD that would challenge my capabilities and actually push me to do some real science that has some implications and grow with it. So my PhD was quite different from what I worked before that. So I was, of course, working on climate change and trying to understand plants and croplands and their functioning. But in my PhD, I got an opportunity to go to Amazon forest and ask the same question on how those trees in the hottest Amazon forests are responding to climate change, particularly the air temperatures are increasing. So how would they continue to survive and function in that hot environment, and how would photosynthesis, the process, would respond? And now that brings me to my passion, photosynthesis. Now, I don't like the word passion myself, but I think photosynthesis is a process, the most wonderful process on earth, where the energy from the sun is sequestered and is used by all the organisms, almost all the higher organisms on the planet. Now, I was driven to this process from my master's course. I never got an opportunity to get into those. And I wrote to my supervisor, one of my supervisors, my primary supervisor, David Galbraith. And so he is quite, supportive. And then he replied back promptly that, your CV looks good, but we don't have any, opening right now, but I'll get in touch with you if there's any new opening. And hence I had applied for a few universities, and then I got through some, but the biggest challenge was funding, and I kept pursuing it. But then after a few months, David Galbraith, my supervisor, replied back to that email saying that there's an opportunity for an international research scholarship by the University of Leeds, and he helped me through the application process, and finally I got through. I think there are a couple of scholarships they provide every year globally to support outstanding researchers, and I was really lucky to have received this scholarship. This covered my tuition fees and living expenses for 3 years, and that is quite a lot of money. And that gave me the opportunity to work with some of the best scientists of our field. And I actually sort of changed my PhD topic right in the beginning, because the application was to understand how transition forests are changing and responding to climate change. But then there was this question of photosynthesis that David asked, would you like to pursue it? And then photosynthesis was my first love and is my first love always. And I took it up, and I started learning photosynthesis from the scratch, because whatever I had learned before was from a textbook perspective, and that is only good to a certain extent, but I think it is important to unlearn things. And I started playing and measuring photosynthesis with the instruments that were available. And that was the most wonderful learning experience I had. And my PhD thesis title is High Temperature Responses of Photosynthesis. So it has a very broad theme, but two of the chapters are measuring photosynthesis using two different approaches for these Amazonian trees. And the other half is a new technology that I developed in trying to understand how leaves absorb light while they are responding to heat stress. Now, well, honestly, I wouldn't say I faced any challenges, because I think that the turning point was essentially this award of the scholarship that enabled me to work with this wonderful team. And from then until my PhD viva, everything was super fantastic. I don't think there were any challenges. But then even if there were, our supervisors and our technicians and all other friends and colleagues, we work as a team essentially, and that is the beauty of a team in the School of Geography, where I did my PhD. So I did not face any challenges, and I think I'm super lucky. But when I say I did not face challenges, it also stems from the fact that this is what I wanted to pursue. And I think it is important that if we do not choose what we want to pursue, we will always see issues. So I would say go where you want to go. And I think I was super lucky to have done that. Well, I just finished my PhD, so I'll just tell you that period. I think I'm still sort of getting into a postdoctoral researcher mode, but my PhD period was quite intense and exciting, not challenging, because that's what I wanted to do. And the initial 1.5 years involved a lot of learning, where I would start my day at 9 or 10, but then I go on until 9 or 10 in the evening. But then the field work period was the most intense one, when I used to wake up at 3 a.m., get everything ready by 4, calibrate my instrument for the next 2 hours, and by 6:37 I would start measurements that would go on until 3 or 4 in the evening, and then have a dinner and then sleep. So that was my schedule, and it was fantastic. I loved every single day there. But then the writing period was a bit weird and interesting. So I developed my love for coffee then. And it was fun, because all these papers, so I had many different chapters, and I was working with different supervisors on different pieces of work. So I had this variety I was fortunate to have, and that actually kept me quite upbeat and going. And of course, my supervisors. I think it's important to find a team which is supportive, positively supportive, and critical, not just supportive. So yeah, it was quite intense, but I loved every bit of it. Well, I'm quite lucky that I have two of these. I think my PhD, where I got an opportunity to work in the Amazon forest, is definitely one of the most memorable. The other one, which is actually close to my heart, is the work I did in the agriculture sector here in South India, where along with a team of 5 NGOs, I was lucky to measure greenhouse gas emissions from different cropland systems. So how much carbon reduction you can make if you adopt sustainable practices. So this was implemented with the farmers, and this was quite meaningful among all the work that I've done, with sort of implications for farmers. Um, I'm not a kind of person who would advise, but I would say have a clear vision, and please do not go by the buzz of the day. So I'm sure your teachers will tell you that over different period there were different fields that were exciting and interesting, and that had the sort of, there's a word that students use called scope. Is there a scope? I don't understand that scope, because Simply put, if you look at any of your education and if you see somebody who's pursued it and advanced in that same direction for like 5, 10, 15, 20 years, you will see where you can end up. And if you are cognizant of that and if you want to go that direction, please do it. And I think that is clear. But if you want to do something new, there's always a way. And it can happen everywhere in the world. And don't just confine yourself to India or anywhere you are. It's important to look globally and also to try and find solutions that matter. And if your thoughts are grounded in this, irrespective of what field you're excited about, the point is if you see a future and if it has an implication, pursue it and pursue it with your full heart. My future plan is essentially I want to advance my work that I did in photosynthesis in two streams. One, I will continue to work in Amazon forest and forest elsewhere in the world and try and understand how they respond to impacts of climate change. But then the other interest is to continue working on crop systems. So now with a focus on improving their yields and trying to understand how they're stressed, particularly to try and work in precision agriculture or trying to breed better varieties. So there are ways of doing it. My approach, my little effort would be to try and understand how energy interaction in leaves change and how plastic, how flexible they are, particularly focused on photosynthesis. Well, that's a big thing. I don't think I've done enough work as of yet that I can claim and say, I've benefited the society. But I do see that these are going in that direction, and I would advance it more in the future. But when I say this, I'm mostly focused on trying to understand how tropical forests work under extreme heat conditions, and I want to apply those ideas and mechanisms in croplands in trying to improve crops. Now, if you look at, like I mentioned about long-term global challenges, the biggest challenge that we'll face by 2050 is to produce enough food for the population that will end up on this planet. Now, during this green revolution, the way we can improve the crop yields for a given area of land, we've exhausted that. And the only way we can try and improve yields in any drastic way is to try and tweak photosynthesis. I haven't gotten into this, but this is the direction I want to get into with